All right, so there we are now recording. We're doing all the things. I'm just kind of getting all my last minute ducks in a row, and it's just nice to talk to you for a hot second. So tonight we're covering a fairly dense topic, which normally means it's not going to do well as a stream. So maybe this will just do well as a YouTube video when it goes up, or do well as a podcast. But my plan tonight is to walk all the way through romance as a genre, romance as a story structure, romance as a subplot, pretty much in that order. And if you are brand new to this, there's going to be an intro that some of you have already heard, but I'm assuming and I'm hoping that some people will get a handle, will get given this copy or sent this link and have no idea who the hell I am. So bear with me for an intro. Here we go.
And now we'll see how good you are.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Ready to work.
How do I start this? So I was thinking today about just the general complexity of things and how genres are taught or not taught or badly taught. And I was thinking about really how I teach as a whole, because tonight what I have for you is a fairly in-depth look at a genre, look at a structure, look at a subplot. And this is not particularly light in content, but it can be straightforward. And I'm hoping that whomever you are, wherever you are, listening to this, watching this, whatever, that this is going to help you in some way, even if all of it doesn't help you. Some of it somewhere at some point will. If, by the way, you got a copy of this or sent a link to this or were told to go check this out and you have no idea who I am, my name is John Adamus. I'm the writer next door, and it's my job, as it has been for the last over 20 years, my job to help writers write better by explaining how to do things better. Is that fair to say? I'm a writing coach and an editor. I help writers start, work on, and finish their stuff, and then make it the best it can be to go out the door to whatever kind of publication they're looking for. And I was surprised. I was really surprised to find out after I did the math that about 70-ish, 71, I think, and change % of my client base and my current workload are romance novels. It wasn't always like this. I used to be, 70% deep into role-playing games or 70% deep into fantasy novels. So romance structurally kind of snuck in there and then took over. And I have worked in hetero romance, LGBTQ plus romance, paranormal romance, fantasy romance. I have worked up and down traditional and self-publication. I have seen a ton of romance novels, somewhere in the average of like 6 to 11 a year for the last, what year is it now? 22. So for the last 11 or so years, it's been 6 to 11 romance novels every year. It's great. Do I like romance novels? No, but I like work and I like paying bills and I like being able to eat food. So, this is just sorry. Ants. There's like one rogue ant, and I've been trying to brush it off the desk. I really apologize. Sorry. I think I got it this time. One of the cats will assist the ant off its mortal coil for sure. Tonight, as we saw in that graphic. Tonight, my goal is to walk you through the perfect romance, from sort of big picture genre stuff down to just romance as a story structure, all the way down to how to do it as a subplot in other genre. And I have, if you're going to see me constantly look over to the side of the screen, I have notes. I actually made notes. I tried writing down rather than just rambling. So we'll see how that goes. My estimation, my expectation is that this is about an hour to an hour and a half. And I strongly recommend that if you're watching this sort of after the fact, feel free to pause frequently, rewind, take notes, do all you got to do to just make sure you get the best help you need. I want to start first with a couple disclaimers and then get into the basic building blocks of what romance as a genre and a structure is. So here we go. First of all, hello, everybody. Hi, thank you. I didn't forget you guys. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you for resubscribing. This is great. You're great. Everything's going well. So far, so good. Also, this is stream, I think, 15 or 16 post-wiring job, and should have done this a long time ago. So on we march now, right? Some basic disclaimers. The things I'm going to talk about are not limited to heterosexual romance. They are not limited to really any kind of romance, independent of gender identity or even genre when it comes to subplots and story structures. It is not limited by publication. So this applies to everybody, whether you're doing traditional publishing or self-publishing or hybrid or whatever. This is also not limited to whether or not it's a subplot or whether it's a main plot. These are the universal building blocks. If you have a romance thing, I don't know what else to call it, a romance element in your story, you're gonna have these building blocks. So let's get started with the basics. All right. First and foremost, you are going to have one or more narrating point of view characters. Where's my camera? There's my camera. Narrating point of view characters. Now, that might be in first person, that might be in third person. You're going to have one or more because you might have what's called an A-B kind of setup where you have two point of view characters. Sometimes they're split along the gender line. Sometimes they're split just in terms of being different characters. Doesn't really matter. But you might have more than two. You might have a thruple or a polycule. So you have, 4 or 5 or 6. And in that case, instead of it's AB, it would be ABC, ABCDEF, whatever number of letters associated with whatever number of narrating characters. A word of caution. Don't go nuts on that. Don't go way over the top and go, well, if that book has 3, 8's better. This is not... We are not trying to figure out how many toppings to put on our sundae at the ice cream bar. There is a reason why fewer point of view make for more effective romance structures. Not because polyamory or polycules are inherently bad. They're not. They're great. It's just that trying to narrate that story is often a challenge for people who do not have the personal or lived experience to accurately depict them or fathom them. That's why you don't really see a whole lot of like wine moms dive deep into polycule structure. But we'll talk about that when we talk about authorial voice decisions. But for now, your first building block, you're going to need at least one point of view character. Sometimes just one, sometimes more than one. It is very possible that you can have more than you need, at which case pare it down. There isn't really like an ideal math that says, oh, if you have this kind of story, you get that many characters. But generally, somewhere between 1 and 4 is about stretching it for one straightforward romance main plot, only because that's a lot of characters to kind of swap in and out of in between, and it slows things down, and it can be a pain in the neck. Most of the times, you're going to get 2. Whether that's male-female or female-female or male-male or whatever, those 2 point of view characters are going to be separated by some kind of distinction. Maybe it's time. Maybe, they're existing in 2 different places and they can only communicate because of the magic mailbox at their postal address. That's the lake house. Maybe they're people who communicate only through letters because of a war. Maybe they're people on the wrong side of the tracks. No Montague gets down with any Capulets. Nobody puts baby in a corner. Maybe there's, a have and a have-nots kind of situation, but there's always some kind of distinction between our 2 characters, not only just name and physiology or something, but also just a general distinction we can point to. Oh, they're this kind of person. The other person is that kind of person. We're going to refer to them as A and B for the sake of this. So that way I'm not strictly, dismissing other gender identities or dismissing the depth of organizations for things. I also just don't want to think of names all the time. So we're going to go with A and B. And gender is important in a romance to the same degree that, like, skin representation, like color representation, and not fetishizing other people is important. It's not fundamental to the story structure. You can have romance with any number of identities, any number of genders, but you want to make sure there's a fair representation, that it's not all hetero all the time, and that it's not all, extremists of one flavor or another all the time. You want to show a diversity of things because the world is full of diverse people and diverse situations and opportunities. So be cognizant of who's your narrating character and why and how you're going to write them. Item number 2, and this really, let's make this number 2, and we'll drop down to the most critical one at 3. But number 2, especially if we're inside a plot, like if we're doing a romance novel and this is your A plot, your main plot, all roads have to service that romance plot. Every single one of them. If you're going to bring up a side plot, if you're going to bring up a backstory, you're going to bring up a who knows what, some kind of strange dude who shows up in the third act with terrible news, whatever that might be, you're going to therefore have to drive everything back to the romance plot. Because in a romance novel, the romance plot is everything. And anything else takes a backseat. Character description, character delivery, character arc, dialogue, world building, other plot stuff from other people doing other things. It all takes a backseat to the romance plot. Because you're writing a romance novel in the romance genre. If you're not doing that, let's say you've got a subplot, not a main plot, that's fine. And then all roads don't necessarily lead to the romance plot. Then all roads lead to wherever your other plots are. But your romance subplot does basically get its own lane. If we can follow that road analogy, it gets to ride in the special HOV lane because it involves multiple characters simultaneously, and it allows the reader, whomever they might be, wherever they are, to really connect with them in some way, shape, or form. But that's not the most critical building block. Here is your most critical building block, and if you understand this, and you let this kind of sink in and you see it in action, you will be able to write romance novels or any kind of romance in a story structure or any kind of romantic subplot. Here's the very straightforward breakdown. All romances, I don't care the gender, I don't care the number of people, I don't care whether it's a period piece or it's modern, I don't care if it's fantastic or supernatural, all of them have a combination of internal and external tensions that the relationship and the people individually in that relationship are always navigating. Always. The internal stuff, and we're going to talk about this when we break down the 9 major steps in romance arc structure and romance story structure, but the internal tensions are how the character feels. Do they think themselves good enough, worthy enough of this other person? Do they have insecurities about the longevity of the relationship? Are they tempted to cheat? Are they tempted to not cheat because cheating is a bullshit concept? Are they, monogamous? Are they non-monogamous? Are they trying to commit to the person? Are they trying to do this? Are they trying to do that? Do they have fears? Do they have doubts? Do they have wants? Do they have interests in other things? All those questions, all those internal feelings-based things help create some of the internal tension for the sake of your romance. Having a character, any of them, doesn't matter who, having a character seriously doubt their ability to be in the relationship changes and affects how they think and how they feel and what they do when it comes to that relationship. And that creates not necessarily the easiest route, but certainly a tense route a reader can relate to when it comes to shaping the story. Does that make sense? The internal tensions come from the people in the relationships. If you have multiple people, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many, you're going to get a lot of intersection. And we'll talk about what happens when we dive into the individual pieces, what happens to how you handle those intersections. But by and large, internal tensions speak to the characters and who they are. It's also a great place for their character arcs, because maybe one, if not both, have to sort of grow into this relationship, admit their feelings for each other, discover that they're good enough. Whatever the conflict is there in their internal tension, you have the opportunity, the ability. Doesn't mean you have to do it this way. It's just that you can do it this way to make it part of their character arc in addition to the main plot. Because remember, if this is a main plot, if this is a romance novel, if this is a big deal thing, your characters still have to have arcs, and there can still be a B plot if this is an A plot. That's not so much the case if we make it a B plot, but we'll talk about that later. But for now, internal tensions come from the characters, which means you have a responsibility to craft those detailed characters. Without that depth, you are really going to have a hard time creating an internal sense of tension, because the relationship will come too easily, or it'll have no real sense of challenge, or it'll just sort of speed up, like all of a sudden, like, hey, there's that person. Oh my God, we've been together forever. And almost all of it seems to happen off page. You want to give something for the reader. You want to make sure they can follow along all the way. The reader wants to be invested in the relationship just as much as the characters, if not more so. So, internal tensions, learn them. The other thing it has is external tension. That's going to be a person or an event or the environment or some societal rule, something outside the two characters or three characters or however many characters you have in this. Something external to the characters that makes having the relationship really difficult. It's, the rule that no Montague ever gets down with a Capulet. It's the idea that, my parents don't want me to date Maria from the wrong side of the tracks. I can't possibly fall in love with him. He's the bad boy. Look at his motorcycle and stubble. That's my boss at my job won't let me fall in love with a guy at work. The evil developer doesn't want me to be happy because I oppose his plans to bulldoze the orphanage. It's something that isn't from a character. It's something coming at or towards or to a character. It might be a person. It might be environmental. We can't fall in love. The volcano is exploding. Or something just societal. You're not, you can't fall in love with a Morlock. Whatever. But those external tensions help keep the story moving, because when the story lulls, and it's going to lull sometimes, when the story lulls, the external tension can show up to kind of give it that little extra prod that doesn't feel too forced or feel too convenient. But it's the combination of the internal and the external working together, weaving in and around each other, through each other, concurrent to each other, that allows the tension in the story to never feel like it got presented once and then it goes unchanged and then all of a sudden it's just sort of done. There's always going to be some kind of tension to navigate until the climax. And then presumably in solving the climax, the ancillary subordinate stuff kind of just goes away because the conflict has been resolved. Are you not supposed to fall in love with Cthulhu? I mean, he is pretty dreamy. He sleeps in beneath, the dreamless sea. Sure, I mean, I'd be down for it, but I'm odd. Not everybody, I think, would be down with a giant monster looking to enslave and destroy mankind on a whim. But yeah, I guess there's always a rule somewhere. A rule, a person, an object, an opportunity, a reason, something they just accept that has to either be conflicted against or ignored or dealt with. But internal and external tensions drive romance stories. Period. You want to find a really good one, a really good romance story, then you're going to look for one that has really present internal and external tensions. You're going to look for like a sloppy, half-assed romance subplot. Not going to be a whole lot of tensions. It's just going to be situational. Oh, we're in love because I'm the only man in the film and you're the only woman, let's say. And now because we are covered in smoke after going through a burning building in one scene, now we are in love. No real stakes, no real development, just situation. We don't want just situation. We want more than just situation. Because situation is convenience, and convenience is one of the three things that can kill a romance. The other being levity, and the other being fucking around with time. But we'll talk about those when we get down deep into the construction itself. But those are the basic building blocks. You're going to need some amount of POVs. They're going to need to narrate. There needs to be internal and external tensions constantly at play, constantly in motion. And at least for genre work, at least for main stories, all roads lead to the main plot, to the romance main A plot. Sorry. All right. Shall we dive into the individual pieces? Because now, if you understand that framework and those basics, you can expand really in any direction you want when it comes to romance. I'm still dealing with this romance in terms of it being a genre and therefore an A plot. But when we talk about subplots and story structures, we're going to take this same format and kind of just shrink it down. We don't need all these parts if it's not the main thing in the book. I think that's sort of self-evident. It's the difference why main plots and subplots are different sizes. It's just that's just how it is. So there are 9 predominant. Is it 9? Hang on, let's see. There are 9. There are 9 significant elements that should be in a romance main plot. Now, it just says 9. And you can have multiple of several of these. So it might be more than 9. You might have 10. You might have 12. You might have 30. Is it possible to have too many? Absolutely. And some of these you're only going to have one of, and other ones you're going to have, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many. And it is possible overall to just take too long to do these things. But if you're in your first draft, if you're just putting this together, don't worry about the population count. Don't worry about how many, development scenes you have. Just get them all down. You can sort them out in the second draft. We talked about that in a previous video. I wish I had the ability to link. I need more subscribers, apparently. I'll just link it down below. How to build a second draft and what's important. Like, we've started that series. The link will be down below in the YouTube description if you're watching this on YouTube. And for the moment, if you're not dealing with a second draft, don't sweat it. Just roll with however many you have. You can always pare it down later. But there are 9 basic types of things you need. Let's go through them one at a time. At some point, we're going to start with the meeting of the characters. Now, again, doesn't matter if we have 2 characters, 3 characters, 5 characters. Doesn't matter what spread of gender or identity they have. Doesn't matter. But at some point, you're going to need to have however many of these characters meet one another. And if you have lots and lots of characters, chances are you're going to have multiple of these things. But most of the time, people only really write 2 characters, A and B. So they only really have one of these scenes, and that's called a meet cute. A meet cute is a meeting between 2 characters that is generally positive, with low threat and high potential. What does that mean? Low threat is exactly what it sounds like. It's the amount of danger the 2 characters are in. There's no bears or ninjas or anything lurking in the bushes. The monster isn't like right there. And that allows the meeting of these 2 people to be fairly pleasant and, kind of like, oh, hi, how you doing? Oh, hey, it's nice to meet you. And it's supposed to be low threat and high potential. High potential being the opportunities for each character sort of feel each other out, kind of get a sense of one another, and perhaps kind of realize that, oh, there's some chemistry here. Oh, there's some interest here. Something. You're laying the groundwork. If you have multiple characters, you're going to need multiple meet cutes. And if you have a lot of characters, you might not need to show all of the meet cutes to all the same degree. You might want to pick and choose a few meet cutes to single out, and the others just sort of happen off page or after the fact or get talked about or described as having already happened, rather than constantly bringing the reader back and showing them another one and showing them another one. You want to be able to have that flexibility. And if you have that many characters, this is already going to take a while. So let's not belabor all the points. For now, you're going to need a meet cute. Probably if you've got 2 people, just one. You got more than 2, more than 1. But it's a meet cute. Now, what goes into a meet cute? You have to have the characters meet. That's really it. And there has to be a low threat. They cannot be in immediate danger. If they're in immediate danger, let's say, I don't know, ninjas attack on their first date, or it's not even a date. Ninjas attack at their first meeting. Then it's not a meet cute, it's a risked meet cute. or a threatened meet cute because there's a threat over there. There's a ninja, there's a bear, there's a something. If it's not a meet cute, let's say it goes really poorly, then it's not a meet cute, it's a meet bad. And a meet bad is really how you get like an enemies to lovers kind of story where people just hate each other, but they totally have to take their pants off with one another. So there are other flavors of meet. There's meet cute, meet bad, meet funny. That's where you're just making jokes and it doesn't really seem to have a whole lot of stakes. But most of the time it's shorthanded to just meet cute, sort of the umbrella for all the different permutations of two people, saying hello for the first time, developing some kind of at least interaction. It ticks the basic box of, have we had these characters meet? Was that meeting okay? Did the world come to an end? Were there ninjas? That's item number one. You cannot start any of this other stuff without doing this first. And it helps if these things are on page so that the reader starts at the same time the characters start. If you don't put this on page, it's going to feel weird and you're going to have to do like the next 2 or 3 steps, like more to kind of compensate for it when it's easier just to have the meet cute and move forward. Don't make it harder for yourself. There's already so many of these steps. But once we have a meet cute, once A meets B or B meets A or A and B show up wherever, for whatever situation, whatever degree, whatever, once they meet, they move to the next step, which is the announcement and development of feelings. Now, you're only really going to have one announcement of feelings, but you can have multiple developments once they're announced. Now, what does that mean? An announcement of feelings does not have to be a statement of like, I think I love her. It can be. Totally it can be. Absolutely it can be. No problem. But it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be a moment where the character recognizes for themselves at the very least, and then for the reader and the world beyond that, but it recognizes for themselves that, hey, I think I kind of like that person. They're not in full-blown love. They're not, ready to move forward with their lives, but there's at least something there. At least something they can develop. And how do they develop it? Well, subsequent meetings, follow-ups. They go back and they've already met, so it's not a meet cute. Now it's just a development of feelings. It's another meeting. Maybe this is a date. Maybe this is a setup to a date. Maybe this is one of those accidental, oh, I didn't know you were here situations. Maybe it's something planned. It could be anything. But there are now a set of interactions, one or more, that allow one or more characters to not only figure out if they have feelings, but get comfortable with them, explore them, see if they have legs, see if it'll develop into something else, and it'll help stoke sort of all manner of tension and interest going forward. Because if you have a good meet cute, right? Your A meets B, everything sounds great. A and B cross paths a few times, and then all of a sudden, they realize they're kind of into each other. You're building not only a kind of intimacy tension, an intimate tension, an emotional tension, will they, won't they, a sexual tension, depending on how hard they flirt. You're building a general story arc development, like how are these two people going to get together, depending on what the world is and what's going on. Like there's loads of different things here that stem from the early development of feelings and the announcement of those feelings. Now remember, announcement does not necessarily mean the character runs out into the world, kicks open the door and goes, I'm in love, and just, goes to some absurd, hyper-visible degree. You can. You don't need to. It just has to be a moment where they're sitting with themselves and realize, oh yeah, I guess I do really like that person, whomever they might be in the story. How many developments do you need to develop the feelings once so that you can announce them, or post-announcement? How many, feeling scenes do you need? Yes. Ideally at least one, but you could have more. Can there be too many? Sure. How do you know when there's too many? When you're starting to repeat yourself, when you're starting to belabor the point, when you're writing the 6th scene where they're trying to figure out whether or not they have feelings, and you've already pretty much confirmed in 4 and 5 they totally do. You're just adding extra. Adding extra throughout this process is the most common problem with romance novels. People just add more shit. Oh, we could have more subplots. Oh, we could have more characters. Oh, we could have more this. We could have. It's not a quantity issue. It doesn't matter how many you have. That's not the point. The point isn't to see like, oh, I can fit 22 clowns in this itty bitty car. The point is the clowns that you do put in the car are the best defined clown. That's a bad metaphor. The best defined clowns that you possibly have. Do what you do well. Don't feel like you've got to suddenly get better because you want to juggle more things at once. Oh, we're going to add in more characters. Just work with the ones you have. Oh, we're going to complicate the plot. Just work with what you have. Keeping it simple does not mean it's stupid. Keeping it simple does not mean you're a bad writer. It means you're choosing to keep things simple so that you can spend time with it, so that you can develop it. You're not looking to have like 15 things going at once. Not that you couldn't do it, but if it's your first book, it's unlikely you're going to be able to manage it pretty well. I mean, maybe you will. I don't know, but let's just, the first time you've done anything, did it ever go perfectly the first time? Give yourself a break. Give yourself some grace. Give it a chance to not be as, everything. Keep it simple. It'll be fine. So we meet cute and we develop some feelings and we announce some feelings and we develop some kind of ground floor emotional feelings thereafter, right? So those are our first two steps. We've got half a dozen scenes, maybe more, maybe less. I'm making up numbers. Your numbers do not have to match my numbers, but we've got a handful of scenes to cover these first two. Now I'm going to get a mouthful of water. Then we're going to hit the next sort of major point in developing a romance plot. That's really good. Okay. The next major thing we need. So now we've met cute. We've developed feelings. We've announced feelings. Everything seems like it's on the up and up. What does that mean we have to do? That means we have to add some complication. We have to make something difficult and messy. So we're going to do that by introducing conflict. Now, this conflict could be internal from the characters. Could be external from some factor outside our point of view characters. Could it be both? Yeah. Should it be both? No. But you could do both if you wanted to. Really, you just need to do one here. Now, you can have multiple scenes where you have one scene dealing with an internal and one scene dealing with an external. That's totally fine. You could have 5 scenes with 5 different internals and 1 different external. That's fine. You could have one scene that's just an external. That's fine. The whole point here isn't so much to try and tick boxes as it is trying to get across the idea that there's something, and there will be multiple somethings over the course of this story, but there's something that's making this less than ideal situation. There's some problem, there's something on the horizon, there's some rule, there's some stuff that's keeping this from just ending right here and being perfect. We've introduced some conflict. And most importantly, we've made the characters in the relationship aware of the conflict. Maybe that's, somebody makes a dismissive comment or somebody's insecurities flare up and they freak out and they run away from their date. I don't know. There's some kind of conflict introduced. If you have multiple conflicts, though, here's the wrinkle. Here's why I'm choosing my words here. Because if you're one of those people who thinks to themselves, oh, well, if I want to make a cool character, I got to give them lots of complications. And that's kind of true. It's a little outdated, that thinking, but let's just roll with it. So you've got these characters, and they've got a lot of shit going on, and they got a lot of complications. What do we do? If you sat down and rattled them off one after the other, after the other, after the other, over and over and over again, you are not improving the reader's engagement with your story. You are boring the shit out of them. If I sat here right now, let's just test this theory. If I sat here right now and rattled off for you 11 problems in my life right now, after about 3 of them, chances are you'd start to tune out. Even if I describe them in the most comedic or engaging way possible, given the density of them, given the number of them, and how quickly I'm just firing one after the other, you'd probably start to disengage. You don't want that to happen. You don't want your reader to have a chance to disengage. That's not the point. So be careful, be prudent. with laying out your conflicts. If you have a lot of them, then we're gonna sprinkle them throughout the next couple steps. But this is where the ball starts rolling for bringing in those conflicts. We're not going to do them all at once in one glob and then go for a long stretch of story without any. Or I guess it's glob here and then a long stretch of story there. But we're going to sprinkle these throughout so that there's somewhat of an even distribution. But you have to pick and choose when you introduce what complication. And there isn't so much a wrong way to do it. You can't mess that up because they all got to get introduced at some point. But some rollouts are better than others depending on what scenes you want to come into or come out of. This is why planning matters. So we've met cute. We've developed feelings. We've announced feelings. And now we've introduced, or we've begun to introduce, our conflicts. Now, if we have a lot of conflicts, we need to spend more time with our next step, which is developing more feelings. So these are more dates. This is more interaction. This is more back and forth. This is establishing the relationship. The bulk of your romance falling in love scenes fall into this category. Now, sometimes they're going to get interacted with or bounced off of those internal and external tensions to keep things moving along. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just going to be fine dates, and that's fine. Now, again, we're still dealing with this strictly in this is your A plot. This is the main crux of your book. But when we dial it down and simplify this, you'll see a lot of these same elements come back, only in smaller pieces. But for now, we develop more feelings. And that's a really good place to bring up what's called the intimacy threshold. Well, it's got a couple different names. It's basically the level of attraction between characters and how they are expressing that attraction to one another. This is where things get a little dicey. So I'm going to try and maintain good eye contact with you and walk you through this. So, especially in a romance genre, especially with a romance main plot, you at some point are going to have to deal with some amount of intimacy. Now, whether you take intimacy to mean, purely the emotional stuff of just, I have feelings as well, or whether we're starting to add some physicality to it, whether it's eye contact or hand holding or the gentle caress here or there, or whether we're going further and we're getting into penetrative and non-penetrative sex acts, or whether we're getting into like lengthy, descriptive sex acts or whatever. There's always some amount of intimacy to manage over the course of a romance plot. If you raced off to the more, how do I say this? If they started fucking early, we'll just go straight. If you have them fuck too soon, the expectation is that that's the entry level for your intimacy, and that every subsequent intimate development is going to be at least that. So if you have them hump on the first date and you detail it, you roll out verbs and descriptors about muscles and body parts and the wetness of things or the firmness of other things, whatever you're down for, or who puts their hands or face where or anything, and you're explicit about it. We're not like, we're not talking shitty euphemisms or vague like, tee-hee, I can't believe I said a no word. I mean, like you're putting it on the page. If you're starting with, oh yeah, they slept together, and I detailed it, and I was intending it for it to be hot to the reader, the reader's expectation is then, well, the next time they're going to be more. The next time after that's going to be even more, and so on and so on and so on, all the way up and all the way through. Be careful about racing to the good stuff just because you want to write a couple different words that talk about genitals. Be careful. Intimacy isn't only physical. And some people hear what I just said and go, well, don't worry, the sex is like the very last thing. It's the sex as reward trope, the idea of, they're going to do all this different kind of stuff, and then ultimately at the end of the story, that's when they're going to jump into bed. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. Totally legit fine. One note of caution, though, as you manage your intimacy. It is going to have to scale upward over the course of the story. Otherwise, it feels really stalled. Otherwise, it feels really forced. And it needs to be somewhat consistent in there. There needs to be some kind of intimacy. It doesn't always and only need to be sex. You know, it's not like, oh, I've met you on page 5 and we're humping by page 8. There are times and places for that. But it could start off as hand holding and eye contact, or like a nervous look away as they start talking because you're embarrassed. And it could build up to, you know, furtive looks and winks and gestures, and then get into physicality, and then get into kissing, and then get into humping. It can progress like that, but it's going to progress in increasing amounts over the course of the story. You have to be able to manage that and be willing to describe what you want to describe and not describe what you want to describe, but not shy away from things and devolve into euphemism because, and I'm making air quotes, audio people, quote, you're afraid of upsetting someone. You're writing a romance novel. Somebody at some point is going to expect some kind of genitals to come into contact with another human being. You're not going to really disturb them. This brings me to a really interesting point about authorial voice, which I mentioned way at the beginning, 40-something minutes ago. Be really careful. Be really careful with how you talk about your work, as well as what you say in your work. For example, let's suppose you tell everybody you're writing a book that's kind of kinky. That's how you describe it. You feel a little thrill mentioning the word kinky. And if someone were to press you on details, you'll lean in conspiratorially just like this and go, there's a scene where someone gets their hair pulled. He. As if that's like the height of kink. Authorial voice gets really apparent when it comes to romance novels. So if you're saying, let's say you have a character say something like, "Oh, this is the most taboo thing I've ever done," and it's something fairly benign, like, "Oh, the most taboo thing I've ever done, it's very, very light bondage, or very, very light punishment or something." It's really the shallow end of the pool. Like, we're not breaking out like extra toys or equipment. We're just kind of, somebody's slapping somebody, somebody's pushing somebody, real light consensual stuff. If you're saying if your character is saying that's the most taboo thing, it is possible that your reader will extrapolate and go, well, that's what the author thinks is really taboo. Be very careful with that. You do not want to pigeonhole yourself sort of big picture book-wise, trying to describe your book as kinky when the big highlight is hair pulling. Like, that's not kinky, that's just hair pulling. We're not diving into the deep end of the pool where some people might get uncomfortable. Nor does it mean you have to dive into the pool in order to qualify as kinky. Just be careful that what you're describing and what you perceive your book to be doesn't become an albatross that you sort of either have to justify or work around when it comes to sales copy or revision or marketing or something. Be cognizant of your own personal feelings about things. Oh, I would never do that activity. Be careful that opinion doesn't filter or leak out through your work if you don't mean it to. Maybe you don't like this particular act, so you don't personally engage with it, and by extension, your character doesn't engage with it. If it never comes up on the text, if it never comes up on the page or whatever, no one's going to know. And it's fine. It's not an issue. But if your character kind of like, stamps their foot and crosses their arm and goes, no, I don't do that, it's going to send a more definitive message than you may intend. Just be aware that intimacy of all kinds, emotional, physical, mental, social, all that stuff, needs to be progressively developed over the course of the story at more or less the same time you are developing feelings. Now, some people will argue that because of that intimacy development, feelings are the result. Other people will say that feelings are the cause. Either way, the two things, feelings and intimacy, develop somewhat hand in hand over the course of the story, progressively building. Even if you're long past, two characters telling each other that they love them, or you're long past like, hey, I'm going to do this thing with my pants off. There's always a level of intimacy being added to. There's always a level of physicality. There's always feelings to develop. And likewise, as we develop feelings, we move on to the next step, which is reintroduce more conflict. Now, that does not mean You introduce new conflicts over and over. Sometimes you just bring that old conflict back. That's fine. If you don't want to get into the habit of constantly trying to solve a I need a thing here problem by adding a brand new thing from the start. Work with the pieces you have. It's going to make far, far more sense. And as your feelings, as your character's feelings develop, as your intimacy increases over the course of the story, given the way the conflict externally is shaped or internally shaped, those conflicts are going to come up more often. So if you have a character who can't commit, let's say, then as the relationship intensifies across all frames, as it becomes more physically intimate, as it becomes more emotionally intimate, as it becomes more frequent, the interactions, somebody who's afraid to commit will act and react differently because they're afraid to commit, and this relationship's going to feel like it's, inevitably charging towards them. That's going to change the way they act and react. That's a commitment arc. That's a nice piece of storytelling. Be careful with that. As you introduce conflict, you're working towards climax. That's how I wanted to get that sentence out of my face. When you get to there's a decision somewhere in the second act. So if you're wondering where the acts line up in your main plot like this, let me get one mouthful of water, and then I'll tell you kind of how to parse this out across acts. Okay. By the time you're done the first act, you're going to need the meet cute. Now, maybe that's the end of the first act. Maybe that's in the middle of the first act. But at some point, you're going to need the meet cute. And you're probably going to have the announcement or development of feelings nearer the end of the first act. Going into the second act, you can develop those feelings and start introducing conflict and develop more feelings and increase intimacy and reintroduce conflict. And all of those things, feelings, intimacy, conflict, feeling, intimacy, cycle around, not necessarily in that order, but they all hop around. The conflict shows up when narratively sensible to do so. The feelings show up either as a cause of or an effect from the intimacy developing. Hello, hi. The goal over, I'm pretty sure I just said hello to a bot. We'll fix that in a minute. But your elements across your second act here spool and move through one another, all driving towards you're not a bot. Okay, I'm glad you're not a bot. Thank you. Appreciate that. Hello from a human too. So these 5 elements sort of hold up the second act, and they're going to develop as frequently to whatever degree you need for the course of your story. Make sense? Like it's there's no magic number. It's not like do this 3 times, do that 4 times. You can make it like that, but that kind of strips some of the flexibility and some of the humanity and some of the interaction out of it. What you want to do instead is kind of keep that feeling and conflict and intimacy simmering. Is that fair to say? That's sort of like it's not a full-on boil that's going to evaporate, but the water's in motion. We got some bubbles. We're cooking along here. That simmer is going to build all the way to a climax. Now, what is a climax in a romance main plot? That is where your internal and ideally internal plus external tensions collide so that you have no choice but to try and overcome them, both as individuals in the relationship. That's where you get your character arcs from. So that's your character who is afraid to commit, suddenly learning to commit. It's a stew. It is a stew. That's a really good way of putting it. Your character with their individual character issues have to confront their character issues in order to move forward. And the relationship as a pair or a throuple or a polycule or however many people are involved have to deal with the external tension. Both. All of it. That's your climax. Now, this can be as simple, depending on the story you're telling, this can be as simple as somebody, who's wondering about whether or not a person likes them, but they have to, they're from the wrong side of the tracks. So maybe it's sneaking across the side of the track, singing a song, and then taking your girl to the dance before a dance fight breaks out. Maybe it's something as straightforward as Darcy proposing and shutting him down. Yes, there's some kind. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a very good one. there's some kind of conflict, and all things, as much as possible, build to a head. If you have multiple things, you can make an argument for needing multiple climaxes, at least spread out over time, so that you don't have like one giant chapter of like 85 million pages where all of a sudden all shit hits all fans. You can spread that stuff out. But again, if you've got that many things, if you've got that many pieces moving, consider that you might have too many pieces. We'll talk about that in a minute. But by and large, everything is going to lead to a conflict, a climax, the level of conflict and climax that your characters have to both individually and collectively overcome. That's the end of your second act through your climax. How long should that be? Yes, it should be some amount of pages. It should be some amount of words. It should be some amount of chapters, one or more. Is there a right number? No. Are there wrong numbers? Sure, but you got to get absurd to do it. But that's that building block. Now, once we've overcome things, once there's no more external plot, once there's no more internal tensions, or they're mostly pretty resolved, or they're resolved to the degree where they're no longer a major threat, we move to that last 9th step, resolution. Now, much like the meet cute, you're really only going to have one of these because the book is pretty much done at this point. But you're going to resolve all the outstanding stuff, all the subplots, all the minor pieces. You're going to try and wrap things up. Now, some people will get on a very high horse and tell you that it has to be a happy ending. And other people will tell you that, oh, no, it has to be a sex scene, or it doesn't have to be shit. It could be whatever. It can be whatever. It can be happy, it can be not happy, it can be tragic, it can be brooding, it can be fatalistic, it can be sexy, it can be whatever. It can be whatever, doesn't matter. It just has to be something. Even if it's a series, even if it's not a series, you do not have to go out of your way to leave the door open to specifically come back and visit these characters in this snapshot. But there needs to be some resolution so that even if this reader never comes back, never picks up another book, they've had a satisfying story. Those are your 9 steps for how to romance main plot. Critical in a romance story. Everything from here on out takes a version of this and shrinks it down, okay? Everything. So, as a story structure, what we're looking for, what we're dealing with here, is the overall idea that it is the tensions, internal and external, and the want, the goal of a relationship. Was it just to get laid? Was it to have feelings? Was it to feel not alone? Whatever that goal is. Goals plus tensions working together allow romance as a story structure independent of genre. It becomes a thing of bells and whistles at that point. I don't care if you have, one of your point of view characters in your romance can turn into a box of cereal. I don't care if they have the power of gods. I don't care if they, can command legions of chickens or whatever. All that stuff. I don't care if they're dead. All of those bells and whistles are totally and entirely superficial. And when you put a premium on them as though they are a substantial tension for your romance, you are kind of hand-waving away some of that romance for the sake of, oh my God, look how cool this thing is. And it might be cool, but it's not necessarily the thing that your character B is going to fall in love with character A over. Hey, you're dead. You're a ghost. I've always wanted to love a ghost. That's not exactly the best groundwork for a relationship. Don't get lost in the bells and whistles. Embellishing them and adding to them and trying to make something out of it doesn't entirely help. All right, so hang on. There's a question here. What are my thoughts on the ending of that one movie with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston? Is that the breakup plan? The one where they're the couple and they decide that they're not, it's not working out, so they break up, but they end up getting back together. Is that the one I'm thinking of? On the DVD cover, one of them's holding a pillow or something. The breakup. Okay, God, has it been that? Let's see. Can I remember that movie? Let's see. I think so. Do I remember the ending though? Am I allowed to like look online real quick for the ending? I do not remember the here. We're gonna cheat. Dude, I know this is the most riveting thing ever. 2006. Holy shit. All right, let's see. All right, so they don't entirely get back together. Okay, so they don't get back together. Yeah, that's still a resolution. That's still an ending. That's still a thing. You don't have to get the only rule of a character arc is that you have got to show the character in a different ending point than they were in a starting point, right? So the only rule in a character relationship is that they're affected in some way by being in that relationship. So if they were dating or broken up and the story progressed and it changed them as people and allowed them to go in separate directions, it doesn't matter if they come back together or not. It's a satisfying ending in that it satisfies the issue and the conflict of the story, but not necessarily a satisfying positive send the viewer reader home happy. It's not, oh golly, that was great, satisfying. It's satisfying in the sense that it did the job it was supposed to do. Would I go out of my way to watch that movie? No. Maybe am I allowed to like do other things while it's on in the background? Can I like make graphics or think about my hockey team or something? From what it sounds like it's kind of lazy. Like, it's real easy to either rush a happy ending and get everybody together or just have everybody walk away and smile. Like, those are two kind of cheap. They're not bad, but they're relative to how volatile the story might be. Getting them back together makes everything feel pat, and breaking them up and splitting them apart makes it feel like the wanting them together didn't matter. It's a risk. I could see a very visceral reaction to it. Maybe, well, I already have the poll out for next week, but maybe later in June we'll do like bad rom-com stuff. Maybe we'll put the breakup on Patreon. That sounds like something I could annoy myself with for a few hours someday. That's a good call. Let's make myself a note. Where's my notepad? Okay. Cool. Now, we've covered relationship main plot, and we've outlined some of the bells and whistles stuff. Fine, great, well, good, perfect, and delightful. What if we're not making a romance novel? What if we just want a subplot? What if we just want, like, part of this structure? How do we do that? What do we need to do? How do we make this happen? Well, we're going to look back at our list of 9 things, and we're either going to skip steps entirely or really, really simplify them down. So let's suppose we want to have just a straight up B plot. We want to have a romance subplot, independent of our genre. The first decision we have to make before we even really sit down and sort it out is take a look at what kind of genre we're in, and then figure out how to fit the B plot into it. Hang on, I'm moving in my chair and getting more water. Oh. The same rules do apply. It's just that they apply in smaller ways and with fewer like obligations and criteria. No tea today. It's been all water. I've been desperately thirsty most of the day. I had a really salty lunch, and it's just messed me up ever since. So I'm chugging water. It'll be fine. Okay. So let's suppose we have a romance B plot. We don't need to go all the way back to the building blocks because presumably our POV character is probably our main character, and we are not giving our romance subplot partner, probably not giving them their own POV, and we're probably not going to alternate to it because we're not, because it's a subplot, and they don't need to get their own POV across in order to have a subplot. Just no, it's not a romance novel proper. One POV is plenty. So that takes care of that. And by not giving that romantic partner, I guess we'll call them, by not giving that romantic person their own POV, we don't really need to develop that half of things. We can see it in reaction to what our POV character is doing. And then we can infer from there. So it's pretty straightforward on that front. There's still going to be internal and external tension and stuff driving the story, but it's going to be way simplified because it's not a main plot. So we don't need to dig that deep into the internal conflicts and crises. Maybe there's just one issue, somebody who's afraid to commit, somebody who's scared of getting hurt again. One single internal issue can be plenty, depending on what it is and how you develop it and how many times you ring the bell about it and do something with it. One is plenty. The external tension in this case, though, isn't necessarily specific for the B plot. It's the A plot tension, the external tension. Oh, by the way, I'll totally go on a date with you, but the world is ending. We have to go save the city. The external tension can often be the A plot conflict. Using those building blocks simplifies the rest of everything. Now, there is an interesting question here I do want to bring up. Too often, the B plot romance feels tacked on. How do you avoid it? Well, the reason why it feels tacked on is because as a B plot, it seems to come inorganically to the story. It feels forced. There's either too few characters or too little development to make this relationship seem like a natural consequence. It's like you're going out of your way to call attention to it. Like, hey, look over there. Are you in love yet? Look over there. Are you in love yet? Them. You got it? Them. You loving it? You loving it? I'm loving it. Let's go. We don't want it to feel tacked on, so we want to try and find the right amount of story space to give it. And when we do develop it, we want to make sure we have just enough development so that it feels material, but not so much that it feels forced and not so little that it's just kind of like, oh, by the way. That balance is tricky. That's usually something like a good second draft edit or even a third draft edit will pick up on. It is a frequent coaching sticking point, and it really just comes down to understanding the 9 steps we talked about back in the beginning. You're still going to, as a B plot, you're still going to need a meet cute. There's no way around meeting people. You need a meet cute. You're still going to need to announce feelings, but sometimes that's enough, depending on the kind of B plot it is. You know, I love you, I know, whoosh, carbonite. There you go, announcement of feelings. That can be enough. Sometimes it's not enough, though. Sometimes we have to go past that. So sometimes we meet cute, we announce and develop some feelings, we run into some conflict, which complicates the existence of our relationship. I can't date you now. The city needs me. Something like that. Or I would love to date you now, or we should totally flirt, but first we have to survive this, crazy escape from a helicopter or something. There's almost always some kind of external conflict, always some kind of other thing pulling character attention and focus away from the plot, so that there's your conflict. And then we develop some more feelings. When the romance is a B plot, you are probably going to accelerate your intimacy. You don't have the luxury of taking too long. Get into it, do what you got to do, probably not that many times, and it's probably pretty explicit, depending on how you're writing it. But this is why, like in a TV show, like in a first season of something, there's always, 1 or 2 sexy scenes near the end of the season. Like if you go look at Amazon Prime's Reacher, the story develops pretty straightforward, but things only really get sexy when people shower together, like 2 episodes from the end. Why? Because it's the B plot. Because prior to that commitment of intimacy, prior to all those activities where, oh, that person's taking off their shirt and joining that other person in the shower, prior to that, everything has been building up to it, but not to the point where we've been waiting, will they, won't they, moonlighting or Cheers style to really see if they're going to do it. We know they're going to do it. They're the 2 characters around whom we've spent the most time as viewers. It's inevitable, but it's not critical. That distinction requires a lot of balance. That distinction requires a lot of planning to be inevitable, but not like, oh my God, they're finally doing it. Because sometimes you just got to have somebody get naked for your TV show, which is weird and creepy now that I say it out loud, but that's still generally the thinking. Throw some boobs on there or a butt or 2. Sure, I guess. But you're gonna speed through your intimacy and certify it. Say that that's what it is, and then assume it will always be that going forward if you don't show it again. There's less uncertainty about it as a B plot, because it's either going to happen or it's not. You know, your brainy girl and your dumb guy are eventually going to kiss, and the presumption is they're going to get together off screen. So, oh, excuse me, my nose is itching. To some degree, it can be that straightforward and that simple. And then from there, you're going to shift back to, developing more feelings, certifying it, and then moving away from it. They've already overcome the challenge was inherent to the relationship. Will they or won't they? So any conflict they have to pick up and move on. It goes back to the main plot. It's just it's an off ramp on the story, right? So let me do this vertically. Here's our main plot, and here's our subplotted. We're still reaching the same spot, but we're kind of skipping some middle steps. Whether we're talking action subplot, legal thriller subplot, Western science fiction, fantasy, whatever, all those pieces still hold true. Meet cute, develop feelings, escalate intimacy, develop more feelings, internal conflict, resolution. So now we went from 9 to about 5 or 6. And you can shorten it even further if it's, not a very big B plot. Maybe it's something as simple as just, the meet cute is the end of everything. The idea of your young Polish girl running out of the woods and encountering your large Superman with white hair and a sword, and suddenly going, hey, where's this other character? Essentially, your meet cute is the end of your arc rather than just the beginning. But again, to do something like that suggests that all the pieces of the arc and you've mapped it all out in advance, and you're not just winging it. A good romance main plot or subplot is not something you just made up on a whim. Oh, I waited for the alignment of the stars and the wind blew through the office, and all of a sudden No. Organize this stuff. Make some decisions. Think it through. Develop these pieces. Yes, you can do that. It's not as fun and exciting as just kind of making it up as you go, but it's going to be more responsible, and it's going to lead to a better product, and you're going to be more likely to get published and more likely to sell well the better organized you are. Isn't that kind of an okay trade-off? Aren't we all right with that? I'm hoping you are. All right, so we've gone from main plot to story structure to subplot. Let's go even smaller. Let's go look at romance arcs. Mouthful of water, though. Okay. A romance arc isn't even enough for a plot. A romance arc is an exploration of a character's feelings about something or someone else. It's not even a full relationship. It's not even reciprocated with intimacy, necessarily. Can be, not always. It's just how a character feels. As an arc, it's not 9 steps, and it's not 6 steps. It's like 3 steps. There's a meet cute. There's the development of feeling and the announcement of feeling, and that's it. So we've gone from 9 to 5 or 6 to 3. Why? Well, 1, the meet cute sets up the idea, the recognition that, oh, there's this other person or thing over there about I will have feelings. Ah, that person is really attractive. Meet cute, done. Do they have to meet me back? They can. Doesn't ultimately matter. But I at least have to meet them. I'm the point of view character. They're not. I meet them. Check. 2, develop feelings. Wow, I really liked meeting them. That was pretty great. I have a lot of trouble with feelings. I, now the main character narrating the story, will spend pages, paragraphs, chapters, sentences, whatever, talking about my feelings, perhaps with a flashback, perhaps not with a flashback, but mostly talking about how I feel. And finally, once I've gone through how I feel and I've fantasized for good or for ill, or I've had other meetings, or I've I can't stop thinking about this other person, I will announce my feelings and call it a day. Why? Because it's an arc. I was driven to do a thing. The conflict was, will I have feelings? Will I develop it? I started here. I met them. I developed feelings. I reached a conflict crisis point where I had to make a decision. I resolve everything by declaring my feelings. Arc done. If it wants to pick up from here, we reset back. So now I've declared my feelings. Now is my arc becoming a B plot, because now it's a matter of, I know how I feel. Let's see if we can figure out how the other person feels and put the two of us together. Because that's not an arc, that's a B plot. Once we start adding in more people, adding in more factors, adding in more stuff, we transition the arc to a subplot. We can do it even further. We can go from subplot to main plot just by putting more story importance on these same steps. We, meet cute, feelings, announcement. Now we're going to turn it into a subplot. So it's announcement, develop feelings, meet conflict, overcome, increase intimacy all the way through, resolve. Now it's a subplot. We take that exact same process and expand it so that it's the biggest thing we talk about, the thing we speak about most frequently, the thing we speak about with the most detail, and all the other story architecture seems to support it. Now our B plot just became an A plot. My fear is that I've oversimplified this for you. I've made it sound too mechanical. I want to address that this is super not a mechanical thing. I'm trying to make some of it mechanical. I'm trying to make some of it organized and logical, because otherwise there's no teachable point, and I'm trying to keep it teachable. But this is not really a paint by numbers kind of thing. This is some numbers, some paint within the lines, but a lot of it's going to be left to your own interpretation. So here's a great question. When I talk about adding another character, does that mean adding their POV, or could it be from the main character's point of view? You're not going to like this answer, but yes, it could be. You could add their POV. Do I think it's necessary? It's situational. If you've been doing 90 or so % of the book so far with your one main character point of view, all of a sudden, if you randomly grab this other character and start giving them POV, but only for 2 chapters, so you've got this weird 95% of the book is this one person's story, but for 2 chapters just over there, this other person's talking, and it's only about those things, it's going to feel really weird, because it is really weird. When you have a disproportionate balance between shifting points of view, it's going to come across mostly like you couldn't figure out how to do it from the one character's perspective. So for some reason you decided, I'm just going to have this character talk for a minute. I'm reminded of Goodfellas, because in Goodfellas, the movie's going along and everything's doing great. And then all of a sudden, Lorraine Bracco gets her own voiceover. Now, no offense to Lorraine Bracco. She's a fine actor. No issues whatsoever. But her narration and her understanding of things shows up 2 or 3 times at points where story doesn't really benefit. But she has it. She's got some voiceover. It's her point of view for a little bit, but then it shifts right back. You want to be careful with spontaneously just jumping to a different POV character, jumping to a different person altogether, specifically and only because of, a subplot. If it's a main plot, if this is if you're writing a romance novel, chances are you want to switch back and forth from point of view to point of view. But if this is just a subplot, if this is just something that's happening in addition to the main plot of your book, that other love interest does not necessarily, and likely should not be, a POV character. Now, I could be wrong. There are plenty of exceptions. But if it's just, my character also falls in love while also doing this main plot, you don't need to make that love interest a POV character. In that case, it's no different than your POV character finding a mentor and learning a skill. You wouldn't suddenly jump to the mentor's chapter and be like, I taught him how to tie his shoes. I spent many sentences talking about shoe tying and my history in shoe tying, and now the main character ties his shoes. It would be weird to just suddenly jump to a different point of view character, get an idea across. Don't do it. So, do I mean their POV? Sometimes. Do I mean just the main character's POV? Sometimes. It's situational. Generally, you want to try and avoid increasing POV, the number of POVs, if you haven't already established that you're going to use more than one. If you've been doing one the bulk of the time, and outside of the romance plot had no plans to switch whatsoever, don't suddenly make plans to switch. It's not going to do what you think it's going to do. It's going to feel really weird, because it is really weird. Good question, though. Great question. Love that question. Let's see. Where am I on my notes? I did that. I talked about that. I talked about that. Let's cover some basic problems with romance plots and romance construction. We'll cover some basic, hey, I've got a red flag, and then we'll get out of here. Because we're doing pretty good. Yeah, we're doing good on time. All right, so let's cover some red flags. Common red flag number 1. Oh, excuse me. Common red flag number 1. Way too many characters, way too many things going on, and it's all distracting from the main plot. This could be anything from, I've got a main character with like 15 exes who show up, or there's like 25 subplots going on. The more you do that, the more diffuse you make your point of view's attention, the harder it's going to be to figure out what's important. Because you'll have, oh, well, I have character A and B, but here comes C, D, E, F, G, and H in the wings trying to figure out what's going on. Why did you do that? Did you think people were going to get bored? If your first thought is people are going to be bored with my writing, that's not a problem that can be solved by you doing more writing. That's a problem that gets solved by you coming to terms with the fact that you're maybe not a boring writer and you're not giving yourself enough credit, or you're a totally boring writer and you need to just write more overall rather than just write more stuff into the story. Writing is the act of making decisions. So make some decisions. Next red flag. Yes, unless the X's show up in the plot like Scott Pilgrim, at which point they're antagonists. My ideas are good to me, I just never write them. Well, come on now. If they're good to you, write them down. Statistically, on the planet, there are enough humans who like stories that somebody somewhere would like yours, just by sheer math. And it's to your advantage to at least try and make an effort to find them, rather than immediately assume you're not good enough, because you don't have any evidence for that. I mean, if this is the first thing you've ever done, it's not going to be perfect, but it doesn't need to be perfect. If you like doing it, write it the fuck down, see what happens. Give it a chance to be good. I believe in you. You can do this. I was going to get religious with my story and add some romance between human and an alien. Sure. Whatever makes you happy. Whatever you want. Let's go talk about another red flag. Playing around with chronology. Taking too damn long in a story. Because a romance, much like a thriller, thrives on tension. Thrives on the internal and external tensions bouncing off each other, the risks, the rewards, the urgency of things. If you have a real, I can't wait till character A gets their hands on character B, if there's a real drive and need for one another to engage and interact, intimacy or otherwise, if you create that sense of one character will do anything to get the other character, why on earth would you suddenly and randomly jump time? There's nothing gained there. Oh, time travel? Sure, you could use time travel as a developing device, but then it would be more conscious in the story. I'm talking about a story that's a love story, but it also just changes seasons and locations and time. Years go by, months go by, just with a wave of a sentence. 6 months later. This I'm not okay, we're gonna move on. Playing around with the time of things pulls the tension out. Because if you can just hand wave away 8 months, you're saying those 8 months didn't have anything bad happening, didn't have anything noticeable or meritable to talk about. That's not very tense. You're also suggesting that for 8 months, whatever the status quo in the relationship was, you don't have to mention it. So how urgent was it? Yeah, I'm talking about jumping forward for no apparent reason. Yes, I'm sorry. I should have been clearer. Yes, I'm talking about jumping forward with no rooted reason. Time travel as a story structure can either create conflict, create tension, or resolve conflict and tension, which would be a different kind of story structure. I should really do a whole thing on time travel. It wouldn't be more than an hour, I don't think, but I should probably sit down and talk about time travel at some point. But for now, I'm talking about like hopscotching forward and then forward again and then forward again, so that you have like, it's been a year and it's been about like 2 chapters. That kind of jumping in time yanks the tension out, which prevents the reader from really understanding why it's so critical these characters get together. Because if you're speeding through time off page, it doesn't really seem like everybody's in a real rush to get anywhere. This does not mean, I should be clear here, this does not mean the opposite is equally true, that you have to have everything happen in a weekend. You can, not the end of the world if you do, but you don't need to. It can be something as straightforward as, over a couple weeks, over a season, over a month, over a couple months, whatever. You can parcel out time effectively. You don't have to just wave it away because you want the story to feel weighty and connected and managed. Next red flag. Looking at my notes. Next red flag. You're too reliant on a character's bells and whistles to solve problems. We talked about this briefly before, but a character who can like turn into things, or has infinite wealth, or is immortal, or has literally any of the other kind of story-based cheat codes that we've covered elsewhere. All those things that eliminate problems. Oh, I know somebody in every city. Oh, I have more than enough money. Oh, I have, access to this and access to that, and it's never any problem. Anything like that where your first gut response is, it's in there because escapism. It's in there because the reader would love to have this sort of big jet set lifestyle. Necessarily, yeah, sure, okay. You want to have the means to create a fantasy for the reader. Totally, absolutely, no problem there. But over and over and over and over again, whenever you have a situation where your characters could have an interesting problem that could create some tension, that could give them a chance to connect, or give them a chance to interact, or give them a chance to change, or give them a chance to grow, or give them a chance to do anything. But a character's superpowers, means, ability, skill, whatever, takes that away, you are weakening your relationship without even talking about it directly. You are pulling out some of those, building blocks underneath it so that it doesn't quite stand up as well as it could. When your character has the ability to solve problems before they're problems, be real careful, really, really careful that you're not getting all caught up in the special effects budget, in the neatness of, oh my God, I can have a character shoot fireballs. Oh, okay. But this is not a fireball story. This is a romance story. They can they throw fireballs in the name of love? Like, don't forget what you're here to do. Don't forget what your plot is. Don't forget what you're centering your story around. Necessarily, you don't always want to get lost in well, my guy can turn into like every kind of bird. Uh-huh. Yeah, sure. Okay. What does that have to do with their ability or inability to love that human? Like, what are you going to do with it now that you've brought it up? That's always going to be the follow-up question. Hang on. Next thing. Why am I getting... Next thing. Sorry. Next thing. Last thing. Yes, at that point you would just write the fireball story. I really apologize. I got distracted by somebody asking me the same question I just asked. Yeah, you just write the fireball story at that point. If you're so hung up on, oh my God, my character has this cool thing, you'd go write the story about the cool thing, and your romance would go over there and sit in the corner and think about what it's done. Last red flag, and then we'll get out of here for the day. Last red flag. A story that doesn't really have any real conflict to it. There's no external conflict. It gets resolved. There's not enough internal conflict because people just sort of like, oh yeah, okay, I guess we're just down for each other. This lack of challenge directly goes against the want of the reader to read. It's not fun anymore if there's no question as to whether or not this will work. It's not fun anymore if you've already immediately sped through that just because you wanted to write a sex scene or just because you wanted to skip forward to get to a scene you've had pictured in your head for ages. You need those tensions to drive the story forward. You need those tensions to push the characters forward, because without them, your story's just treading water. It's moving laterally rather than forward. And you're just taking up page space writing different vignettes. And there's nothing wrong with writing vignettes. They can be super useful as marketing tools or supplemental material or just like random odds and ends. But you cannot piece a story entirely out of vignettes without finding some way of like weaving something through them, which means conflict, which means tension. So if you're lacking for internal tension, that's a character development issue. You can fix that by digging deeper on your characters, figuring out what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they want, what they lack, why they lack it, why they haven't fixed it. All those why questions that we talked about way back in the other video when we were talking about how to build characters. If you're lacking external tension, be careful, because there can be a real bad habit to suddenly manufacture a ton of external tension and have it show up out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden they're going to bulldoze the orphanage and the malt shop, and this is happening, and there's a protest coming, and the bank is closed, and I'm out of coffee. We're just finding thing upon thing to stack in front of the characters after a long stretch where there was no goddamn problem whatsoever. Be careful. You don't want this to feel forced. So if you're looking for external tension, find something that not only can affect the relationship, we'll put that over here on this hand, the relationship, but also however many characters are involved in that relationship, so that there's some reason why they all have conflict. There's some external thing putting tension somewhere, some kind of torque, some kinds of challenge into the story. Otherwise, it's not really a problem, and people are just passing the time, and next thing you know, you're going to write the end, and it's going to be done, and nobody's going to really have a sense of like, it's just done. We don't want that. You want to make sure your tension is present up until the point of climax, and then it's resolved. That's what we want. Let me look at my time. Are there any questions about any of this stuff? Otherwise, we'll get out of here. All right. I think that's it. All right, let's get out of here. I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank you for checking this out. I know this was a bit of a crunchy lesson. I appreciate your patience. Hang on. There's a question. The internal tension of my story is rather my main character wants to redeem humans after killing his whole race. That's not an internal tension. That's an internal want. An internal tension would be what makes it difficult for them to redeem those humans after killing the whole race. The external tension would be rather the external tension would be a force complicating his ability to redeem them. Internal is why it's not easier for him. External is a thing making it hard overall. Those are your internal and your external tensions. All right. Good question, though. I lost my train of thought. Right, we're getting out of here. So the next time I'm here, this is the last stream for a while. You're going to see me on YouTube and hear me on the podcast feed a bit more frequently over the next couple of weeks as I'm trying some bells and whistles. And I've got some video ideas I want to lay out where I'm like talking over clips and things. We're going to try and do like some video essay stuff. I want to see if I can mostly do it. And I've got a couple podcast audio things that I want to just crank out over the next couple of weeks. So I won't be here teaching this way for a couple of weeks, at least until June, about a month from now. But by and large, I'll be around. And if you have any questions, if you have any issues, the best thing, as I click to the end screen, the best thing you can do, jump over to either patreon.com/JohnHelpsYouCreate, and $2 a month keeps all the lights on. It also gives you access to the Discord, where you are free to ask me however many questions you want. You can also jump to writernextdoor.com, and if you click at the top at book an appointment, you can book a free appointment and ask all the questions you want about whatever, anytime. Beyond that, keep your eyes peeled, stay posted. Click the bell for notifications, I guess we could say, and check out the YouTube channel to make sure you follow all the, what do we have, like 400 hours of content, I think, something. I think we just passed the 400 watched hours of content, so there's oodles there to keep you going and thinking and writing and creating more stuff, and that's only going to grow going forward. So I want to thank you for this. I want to thank you for being here, and I will talk to you guys very, very soon. See you.